What's going on, everybody? So I took a little bit of a break just to let y'all know some other things happen. Basically, I was just being a lazy bum. But we are going to finish this book. So, chapter 18, Accused Before the People's Court. On 26 February 1924, the so-called Hitler trial began before the People's Court in Munich. The venture was the War Academy, where I had spent 1907 as a cadet. A few days earlier, attempts had been made to convince my friends and myself to maintain a reasonable reserve at the trial. Entrusted with this high mission, Professor Bauer visited the prison on 19 February and was allowed unsupervised access without limit of time, something which had not happened before. I heard him out without replying. Even my lawyer, Schramm, thought he should relay to me how the court authorities were thinking after he spoke to them. I replied in a letter on 22 February. After mature reflection, I must decide that the course you suggest. I must decline the course you suggest. Not knowing the decision of General Ludendorff, Hitler, and Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel, I would ask you to inform them that for my own part, I do not consider a limited participation in my trial to be the right way, and I do not espouse the proposed course. Rather, I see it increasingly that the proper and only possibility for the resolution of our intolerable circumstances is a fighting defense regardless of considerations. The idea of those you mention, who would prefer a restriction of the proceedings, is ultimately aimed at guarding against something worse. It is precisely this policy which has brought us the scrap heap we inhabit today. The Volkish idea does not tolerate compromise in half measures. Now that the struggle has led us to the bar of the court, I consider it right to use all available weapons to continue it. The thought of sparring Carr, Lossow, and Seisser is intolerable to me. We see already how things are engineered. Carr remains first minister. Seisser, who has always been on his feet ever since November 1918, is the chief of police. No, we did not bargain for that, and we do not want a second installment of the Fuchs Machhaus trial. Our idea demands, this is my firm belief, the fullest clarification and therefore a ruthless fight. But even on a purely personal level, I am not prepared to grant any concessions. I've been detained since 9 November 1923. As things stand, I must be acquitted. Nevertheless, all my complaints, which you were kind enough to forward, were given the old brush-off. Carr and his associates were, of course, not strongly suspect, and they have been given months to cover over the traces of their preparation and involvement. Even their subordinates will probably have been well looked after meanwhile. This fact alone highlights sufficiently for me the true situation. Every alleviation I have requested has been met with scorn and disdain. My last complaint about the leading prosecutor was rejected by the state attorney. Since it was my purpose in this struggle against minor oppression, less to help myself than my friends, who have the pleasure to remain in Stadelheim, it is of course not over, and I shall do whatever appears necessary in the future to render them aid. I have promised myself that not one day I spend in prison will be wasted. I would not wish to delay you, dear defending counsel, with a description of my personal feelings, and consider it desirable to make you aware of my position candidly before the trial opens. I hope that you receive this letter in good time, and I look forward to being with you constantly from the beginning of next week. In high spirits and resolve, I left Stadelheim on 25 February in a prison car for Blutenberg Strasse. I could have no complaint about the food and accommodation at the infantry school. There was a large police presence in the main house, and several detachments of state police were billeted in the Cadet Corps building in our honor. The chairman of the People's Court that would sit in judgment of us was State Judge Neidhart, a fair-minded man of clear perception. We did not envy him his task of steering the proceedings through the minefield. He was assisted by a number of lesser judges and an observer from the Justice Ministry who paid us courtesies and often supported the bench with unwanted encouragement. The state prosecutors were Stenglein and Dr. Erhard, I'm guessing. It just says, anyway, continue on. The former was a veteran of the front and went out of his way to dignify our offense with soldierly motives, and was agreeably objective and reserved. Dr. Erhard, on the other hand, was offensive, and this gave rise to a number of clashes. We accused all met for the first time on 9 November 1923, shook hands, and looked each other in the eye. General Ludendorff, Adolf Hitler, Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel, President Poner, Dr. Frick, Dr. Weber, Lieutenant Bruckner, Lieutenant Wagner, Lieutenant Perlin, and myself. Our defense attorneys were senior barristers Schramm, Kohl, and Bauer, and Zeschwitz. Junior counsel were Lückebrun, Dr. Holl, Dr. Gutz, Hemeter, Roeder, and Godemann. I suppose it would have been better had the accused agreed on the lawyers working as a team, dividing up the defense into special areas instead of each of us appearing in the bar with his personal counsel. Be that as it may, each accused had counsel who put heart and soul into his defense. The fact that they did not succeed in obtaining any acquittals was not their fault. What the verdict was going to be was obvious even before we started. And though some of the judges were uneasy about it, their powers to resist were weak. As the temperamental barrister Cole pointed out during the trial, going too far down the road of humiliation and penance could have been avoided had the defense acted as a team. That we defendants and our counsel allow this procedure instead of letting it go to the extremes was a concession which nobody opposed except Hitler, Bruckner, and myself, although the others probably regretted it bitterly as the trial went on and the guilty verdicts ensued. In a joyful reunion, I shook hands with Hitler. He had difficult times behind him. He had gone on hunger strike in Landsberg, but had finally been dissuaded by Drexler and a party friend. I had the impression that he was worried about reproaches from his colleagues from the failure of the operation of 8 November, and he was clearly relieved when he found us in the same buoyant fighting mood, and none the worse for our comrades 4 months on remand. I shall pass over the events in court, which the world's press has described in minute detail. Of the prosecution witnesses, probably the sorriest figure was, I am safest behind barbed wire, Commissioner General Dr. Gustav Ritter von Kahr, who appeared to have amnesia. General von Lossow at least had the gall to make a show of fighting for his side's cause. Unfortunately, the health of both saviors of the state suffered so grievously as a result of their ordeal in court that both were forced to take the waters in Corfu to recuperate. The special disintegration proves that one cannot tarnish one's honor for a political purpose and expect to avoid paying for it. It was noticeable that the police and court security, who watched us like hawks, were quite happy to allow any Volkischer wearing a political badge, a criminal offense, to take to his heels when spotted, although for the sake of appearances they reported him. Bavarian justice had bigger fish to fry. 20 new cells had been added at Landsberg prison, and they were hoping to fill them. My impression of the other witnesses, insofar as the court allowed them to appear and to be cross-examined, is as follows. Whilst the evidence of the representatives of the so-called leading strata of society, especially many high-ranking officers, was weighed very circumspectly before they opened their mouths in order to do full justice to Kahr's system which they loved, lesser people spoke their minds frankly as their conscience and convictions dictated. It was evident that the loyalty, devotion, and comradeship of the simple man is more common than in the upper 10,000 of the old and new staff. The simple man has no mental reservations, no word of honor to recant. He does not walk the tortuous path of bourgeois society. which elevates the lie to necessity, but bestrides the wide Volkish avenue with firm tread. He does not deceive himself, and is true to himself, and therefore is more true towards others. Significantly, the second article of war places loyalty as the soldier's first duty. A Volk, which has experienced a November 1918, must find its way back to loyalty. Only on this path, cleansed of deception and falsehood, can there be rebirth. Loyalty of those led to the leader, but no less loyalty of the leader to the follower. It is especially the latter which many men who are called to be leaders forget. It seems to me that precisely for this reason, sins without number were committed in recent years. I wanted to give voice to those ideas at my trial by comparing the loyalty of the common man to the lack of principle in many officers. I did not want to generalize. The behavior of certain witnesses brought me to this conclusion. If Generals von Kleinherz and von Hemmer and a number of Reichswehr officers from staff level upwards recall their behavior in court with pleasure, I reserve the right to differ, and an officer such as Lieutenant General Graf Bothmer also cannot use his high position to shield him against merited criticism. Under no circumstances and in no situation must chivalry, which gave them their status and calling, be sacrificed to so-called state authority, as occurred with the leaders of the Munich officers' associations. The unrestrained way in which Lieutenant Colonel von Berchem gave free rein to his Bavarian dislike of Ludendorff caused general indignation. In contrast here were the fresh and unaffected statements made by some of the younger officers and honest, straightforward evidence of Colonel Etzel, Major Hasselmeyer, Major Schwander, Major Siri, and the late Lieutenant Colonel Schlichtergroll. Also, almost all the police witnesses made an excellent impression in the witness box. We all smiled when one of them, a master of understatement who had been inside the Burgerbrau Keller on the night in question, stated, "When the machine guns were set up in the hall, we conclude that something must be going on." The speeches made by the defense counsel were all of an unusually high level. The objective and convincing words of Lütgebrunner, contrasting markedly with the heart-moving speeches by Kohl and Hohl. Strom, my defending counsel, spoke persuasively, and threw his whole being into the battle. Of the accused, Ludendorff's speech made the greatest impact. His words came under heavy attack from the prosecutors. Hitler's oratory brought many close to tears. I faced my judges squarely and proudly. I was not there to explain away my acts of 8 November 1923. I would rather have faced a revolutionary tribunal to answer for serving king and fatherland than offer a defense for what I did on that day. It was my argument that if the court viewed characterlessness, cunning, and deceit as to the correct virtues, then I should be condemned to imprisonment. To put a gloss on or regret the deed for which I was answerable never crossed my mind. I was proud of it and had no reservations. Then, as was hinted to us all beforehand, we were all found guilty of treason. Poner, Kriebel, Hitler, and Weber had to serve out their sentences at Landsberg. Together with the other accused, I was granted a conditional discharge. A huge crowd waited at the gates of the War Academy to hail the traitors. Mounted police who scythed through the mass, lashing out at men, women, and children with whips and batons, could not dampen the enthusiasm. On 1 April 1924, I was a free man again and was welcomed back by my friends and comrades. Now I saw two paths before me: either accept that Germany could not be saved because it did not want to be, in which case I should live out my life in obscurity along with millions of other Germans who could not care less about the struggle, or I could shout Deutschland über alles, now more than ever. History proves that nothing great is ever achieved without setbacks, defeats, and disappointments. We are convinced that only fanatical nationalism can save Germany and bring her Einzig The martyrs and heroes who fell for our sacred cause bequeath us the legacy to fight and win for Germany's revival. I knew which path I had to take. My heart and my work would be dedicated to the simple man, the common man from the Volk, who had won my fullest admiration and respect in the field. I would be his loyal friend, comrade, and leader. The war, in which the simplest of Germany's sons had shared with me the same destiny, had stood with me shoulder to shoulder at the front and stared death in the face. That war had torn down forever those barriers which bourgeois society had once erected between him and me. Visiting a friend of mine at a Reichswehr military depot, I had the opportunity to see the officers' quarters. A single portrait decorated the hall, an unknown German soldier without insignia or rank or name running forwards in an attack. I stood before this image deeply moved. The depot commandant had banned from the hall all pictures bar this one. He could not have consecrated the front experience more strikingly. It is idle to debate whether the achievements in the field of the officer or the soldier are of greater value, but there can be no doubt that the man who suffers, endures, and goes without achieves more. The losses suffered by the working and peasant classes must be more highly valued in view of the fact that the state demanded much more of them and gave them nothing back in return. At pro-fatherland beer festivals nowadays, it is the thing to say that the soul of the worker must be fought for. I wanted to become the brother and friend in real terms of the worker, the simple man, not in words, but in deeds. I do not accept that social class and educational background, certificates of a humanities college, or even money bags are important for the social esteem and a man's honor. The only question which matters is if you are heart and soul a German and ready to live and die for the fatherland, then you are my comrade. If not, I refuse your respect and honor. I wanted to serve a Volk of warriors, not of poets and dreamers. A Volk which by the social democratic way of things are seen today has more faults than so-called merits. So willed, I stepped out into freedom and political life. Just looking at the pages, folks. Okay, we're going to have to break this up into 2 bits because this is a lot to cover. We're going to see how much we can get through. Let's see. Let's try to be realistic here. We're at 18 minutes. Let's see if we can get through. Okay, we're going to get up to page 220. I'm going to change the title. Oh, well. Try and be realistic, folks. I'm trying to pace myself here a little bit because I know. Well, anyway. Cut out the talk and let's just get to it. Chapter 19. In the Reichstag elections of May 4th, 1924, the National Socialist Freedom Party won 32 seats, of which one was awarded to myself. The question of whether it was right for the Volkisch movement to enter Parliament has been much discussed, and in my opinion, is not answered by pointing to the failures and disunity that were evident in the Bavarian Parliament in 1924 and the Second Reichstag session the same year. The reasons here were the teething troubles which made the whole Volkisch movement quiver from its first public appearance and unexpected haul of seats. I consider it wrong to renounce representation in those public institutions of decisive importance in the life of the modern state. During periods between trial hearings at the War Academy, Hitler approved the idea of sending Volkisch deputies to the parliaments, and I agreed with him. I think we should continue with it even if the decision is seen as incorrect today. The teething troubles can be and must be overcome, and must the errors and confusion which still rattle the Volkish movement. I hear the generally accepted objection that since the Volkish movement is against parliamentarism, it should not enter parliament. I answer by pointing to the communists, who are no lesser enemies of the parliaments than the Volkish. Once again, we get this same type of argument again. This is kind of what Lenin talks about a little bit in the idea of left communism, in infantile disorder, I believe is the title. But basically, he's talking about supporting the labor movement or supporting the Labor Party in the United Kingdom. Anywho, carry on. Ultimately, Parliament controls the armed forces, and these we wish to appropriate for ourselves. Since at the present time we do not have the strength to abolish Parliament, we must make use of it from within. If all we can achieve at present is physical presence in the place where the fortunes of the population are determined, to listen and make ourselves heard, this amounts to penetration into the enemy camp and is of value. Incidentally, parliamentary deputies are immune to a certain extent from the consequences of what they say in the chamber, and this license provides us with the opportunity to propagate the Volkisch doctrine throughout Germany. Accordingly, when weighing up the pros and cons, this tips the balance, and I am for the decision to enter the parliaments. Our political enemies know and are concerned at the power of our ideas. Although each enemy is individually more powerful and stronger than our total movement, they have, in spite of their ideological differences, still combined to keep us down. In November 1918, the United Internationalist enemy struck us down, and even when it did not wield the national armed force, it inflicted an almost devastating defeat from which we have only just begun to recover with much effort over these last few years. The same enemy now controls the armed forces in the state and intends to use them against us for the final blow. If we are unarmed, there is little we can do to resist. When presented as a candidate for the Reichstag, and in the few speeches I had time to make before the election, for example, in Ansbach, where I spoke at the invitation of my old school friend, Dr. Einsler, I promised to enter the Reichstag as a representative of the frontline soldier. I made my maiden and only speech in the Reichstag on 28 May 1924 to the charming, tumultuous protests of the communists, requesting the release from Landsberg prison of my comrade, Lieutenant Colonel Kriebel. I also submitted a number of proposals on the rights of front soldiers for the setting up of a committee of inquiry into the treatment of prisoners of war, intervention on behalf of Ruhr fighters in French jails, etc. These made progress at bills, but nobody would be surprised to learn that none came up for debate in the Reichstag. Deputies do not like hearing about frontline war veterans, and particularly not when they are being asked to do something for them. Parliament will, of course, never save Germany. Parliamentarianism is incapable of any great deed. The inability to do anything is a blessed event. Those who desire freedom for Germany must be declared and bitter enemies of Parliament and fight it. When we were leaving the War Academy after the trial, Hitler and Kriebel gave me plenipotentiary authority to rebuild the fighting brigades. I must refrain from enlarging on this for various reasons. The task, as I saw it, was a big one. To form a fighting instrument for the movement out of the brigades banned and shattered by Kahr. The Volkisch idea had not been destroyed, but had taken root in the whole Volk, and creation of a uniform political movement was underway. It was up to me to create a strong military arm as its spine. The form this would take was something I wanted to keep to myself until I had time to gain an impression of affairs in the outside world. I had been in prison for 5 months, and neither government reports nor newspaper articles were sufficient for a clear picture. I hate armchair decisions. Thus, my first weeks of freedom were given up with the conferences and visits. It was a time to scout out information. Lieutenant General Prosch, who had left the state police as a result of the events of 9 November 1923, came to my side as an aide. I had greatly admired his composure at Stadelheim. Today he is in Turkey, since a grateful fatherland has no place for such a man. His valet, Meltzel, was obliged to leave the Reichswehr for the same reason, and is now serving the German cause in Persia. My feelers extended in a number of directions. First, I inquired of the Bavarian government if it was ready to lift the ban on fighting organizations. I wanted to be completely open about what my brigades would be, and I wanted them to continue in the previous mold, but within a much tighter federation. If not, then we would have to go down another avenue. My efforts were hampered by subordinate units of the Kampfbund, particularly the leaders of the Oberland. Already being in negotiations with the Bavarian government and the Reichswehr, under the maxim divide and rule, the government was naturally happier to deal with individual brigades and with a commanding and overall control. Moreover, the Bavarian government was planning a unit called Notbahn, Emergency Force, in which they intended to absorb all the fighting brigades under their own jurisdiction. They had appointed Epp to lead the Notbahn, in the belief that the magnetism of his personality and name would eventually neutralize the competition. Epp accepted the office, but later resigned once he had a careful look at the task. The thinking of the Bavarian government was logical. As long as I was an active army officer, my reaction would have been the same, but now I opposed Epp simply because of the aims of the Bavarian government did not coincide with those of the Völkisch movement. Thus, I forbade any of our membership to enlist in the Notbahn. It was not an easy decision to take, for it meant rejecting certain advantages which only existed in cooperation with the government. It amused me to hear that during the negotiations, the government side had said in all seriousness, whoever is not in the Notbahn will not be able to participate in the future struggle for liberation. This struggle could only be successful if the Notbahn were opposed by the unified Völkisch formations. However, the obstacle was the position of the Oberland, where my friend Dr. Weber did not wish to become involved. His deputies, Mading and Alzheimer, ironic, considered that an independent move by Oberland promised more of the brigade than being in the Kampfbund Federation. The Altreichsflagge, formed by Lieutenant Liebel at Nuremberg after the November event, including in Munich, a local group which had continued the Reichskriegsflagge tradition, came under my unconditional leadership. Thus, in March, Augsburg, Nuremberg, in Munich, Augsburg, and Nuremberg, and later at Memmingen, I reunited with many loyal comrades. Soon after my release from prison, Lieutenant Deschamps, Chief of Staff of Reichsflagge Heiss, attempted to reunite my broken organization. After all that had gone on, however, General Ludendorff would not agree to allow Captain Heiss to continue as leader, and so the reunification of the once formidable organization was not possible. Here follows a short review of the other brigades in the Reich, insofar as I have not covered them before. Of the three great organizations, Stahlhelm, Jungsdeutscher Orden, Jungdo, the Young German Order, and Werwolf, the last led by Klopp, is perhaps the closest to the Völkisch worldview. Mauron, leader of the Jungdo, is attempting to go down a new political path. Whether it is the right one, I have my doubts, not the least as the ultimate aim remains obscure. Stahlhelm is led by Zelta and Dusterberg, whose merits are undisputed, and is the strongest legion of war veterans. In numbers and type of membership, it is an imposing power. On the other hand, I will see in the failure to promote a uniform creed a lack of revolutionary volkish will. Of the brigades which will make up and are vehicle for the youth movement, I know only Jugend, led by the tireless Lieutenant Rosbach. In them lies the future of young Germany. So far as I can see, work is going on whose fruits one can look forward to with joyful expectation. Before I seriously consider rebuilding the SA, whose organization Hitler had entrusted to me, I had detailed discussions with Captain Goering, whom I visited in exile in Innsbruck, and with Rosbach, who worked in Salzburg. The outcome of these talks was that Goering appointed me his deputy and gave me unlimited authority. Rosbach would be my chief of staff in the SA. On 17 and 18 May 1924, a major conference of SA leaders was held in Salzburg, at which I officiated. Those present came from all districts in Germany and Austria. We had to overcome much disunity, discord, and disagreement and uncertainty. I laid down the provisional guidelines for the restructuring of the SA, and these I copied later for the front bond. I reserved to myself the appointment of leaders in Germany and Austria. The successful conference had an impressive conclusion at the Hohensalzburg fortress. You know what, folks? I'm going to call it a day. This is getting a little bit too sleepy, and it's only 11 o'clock, but I think I'm going to keep it there. We're going to finish this up tomorrow. I know I've promised those things before. I actually promised this a couple videos, but sometimes it's just a little too much sometimes. So, like I say, we are almost there. We are on page 211, and we're end is 237. If I really push myself, I'd do it, but it would just, I'm already kind of really messing up. So we're going to end it there. I promise tomorrow we're going to finish this up. And then I think right after that, if I can get it done early enough, we're going to start with the State and Revolution right after that. All right. See you tomorrow.